Let's have a little, begin with a little meditation again. So sit comfortably. I'm going to have a swig of coffee first. And, okay, he's turned off the heater again. If you can, move your attention to the subtler object of the clear light nature of your mind. Whatever appearances occur, discursive sounds, thought patterns in that way, whatever, recognize them as arising within the clarity of the mind and let go of your attention to the particular phenomena other than the nature of the mind. Just concentrate on that. Clear light, unobstructed, unobstructing. Then within the quiet of your mind, within the laboratory of your mind, see if you can produce a thought of attachment, one of the root afflictions, something that you have been or are very involved with. Attachment to your appearance, perhaps, growing old, or being underweight or overweight, or nose too big or nose too small, or this too big or this too small, or attachment to possessions, to friends, companions, even attached to well-being, everything, quote, going right. Attachment to respect, particularly, for most of us, attachment to the feeling of happiness, a feeling of pleasure, whether it be mental or physical bliss, sexual bliss, whatever. The happiness, mental bliss of hearing the words, I love you, feeling secure. Attachment is a mental factor that, on the basis of experiencing something pleasurable, unlike anger, which is based on feeling something unpleasurable, unhappy mind, on the basis of some happiness, the mind inappropriately attends to that and projects qualities either to the object that we think of as the happiness or the happiness itself, projects qualities that it doesn't really have, thereby inculcating this mind of attachment that either wants to obtain that which is not obtained, or to keep without losing that which we already have, that we're attached to. Like glue, sinking into the object. Because it's associated with a certain kind of pleasure or anticipation of pleasure. Very difficult to be motivated at first without knowing. Very difficult at first to be motivated to eliminate it. This attachment causes our mind to be disturbed. See if you can notice that if you go back to the object of attachment. Although it may be experiencing some pleasure on some level or anticipation of pleasure, sometimes not even pleasure, just anticipation of it, it's being grasped in such a way, in unskillfully, that the mind is disturbed. It's preventing our wisdom from seeing the object or the pleasure itself as it actually exists. Finally, this state of mind is based, if we checked deeply, if we went down to the deepest level, it's based on our sense of self, grasping to that, the subject, me, I, who wants, desires, or is attached to something. So as an ultimate antidote, the wisdom of selflessness, the wisdom of emptiness, also the sense of a truly existent object or truly existent happiness as a resource that we could be experiencing. But before we can get to the level of actually working with that subtle antidote, final antidote, we need to train in the temporal antidotes. So first think, as similar to the meditation in the context of anger, think first of impermanence. The objects or beings that we're attached to, or the pleasure itself that we're attached to, is impermanent, changing moment by moment. What we think of as the resources of pleasure, which are merely cooperative conditions for them, they're impermanent also. Inevitably, we would have to separate from objects of attachment. Our cherished ring, our friends, our life, our youth, our clarity of mind, our possessions. All of them are impermanent, so they can't be relied on as the mind supposes, as the mind projects, as constant, perhaps even eternal sources of pleasure. They're unreliable in that sense because they're impermanent. You might say, in the same way as in anger, this too will pass when the mind becomes fascinated with something and begins to develop attachment to it. To imagine the being that we feel attachment to as changing over time, as they inevitably will, aging, having different interests, personality changing. The material objects of our attachment. Becoming older, scratched, or worthless. Bonds, or money that we put in the bank, losing its purchasing value during different periodic financial cycles. If an element of our attachment is the projection that this would be something stable, long-lasting, permanent, then meditation on impermanence can help to eradicate that component that's stimulating the attachment, that particular projection, exaggerating the qualities of it. You too are changing moment by moment. You too will die. You'll have to separate from the objects of attachment eventually, if not sooner, definitely later. And just as you can't take your possessions of this life into the future life, once separated from the pleasures of this life, you can't elongate them, you can't bring them to the future time. All you have left are memories, which, if fueled by the sense of some truly existent, permanent pleasure that seemed to have existed before, causes confusion, sorrow, grieving. So even if this pleasure were lost now, there's not a great deal of difference between it being lost now and being lost later. Inevitably would have to be lost later. It's changing every moment. Even the gross change would take place. The source of our pleasure, the pleasure itself, all arises because of dependent arising, because of karma. Now think of a second reason to overcome this attachment. that the nature of the objects of our attachment, what we fancy as the sources of our pleasure, and the nature of the pleasure itself is being contaminated. It's not real happiness. It's of the nature of suffering. We can't say that happiness is suffering, but it's of an unsatisfactory or suffering nature, in that even the moment we're experiencing it, it's no more than relief. It's not something, a positive attribute that coming in contact with the object of attachment will always bring pleasure. If it did, the longer we were in contact with the object of attachment, the more pleasure we'd feel. Even if I have the object of my desire, my attachment, even if I were to somehow able to obtain that, would I really be happy? What I would find is samsaric, if I'm lucky to find the object and I still have the karma to experience it as pleasure, the most I'd experience is samsaric happiness, relief, contaminated happiness. To recognize even the experience of happiness in our own mind as unsatisfactory is something the human is able to do. Very difficult for the animal realm to recognize what the Buddha called changeable suffering, this contaminated happiness. Very difficult for an animal or other being other than human to recognize it as the nature of suffering. That the very things that we think of as sources of happiness, if engaged in enough, if contacted enough, actually turn into the experience of suffering. If we really want eternal happiness, real peace of mind, we should look for the Dharma happiness the Buddha talked about, the blissful happiness of nirvana, the blissful happiness, eternal happiness of enlightenment. Imagine fulfilling all of your desires that might be nagging, so that there is perhaps some component of attachment in them, fantasizing how wonderful it would be if I had this. Even having met the objects of attachment, keeping them, inevitably you'd have to leave them at the end of this life. You could not take them with you. Every episode of pleasure you'd have to leave behind. You can't elongate. It doesn't continue to satisfy once having been tasted. A little bit like drinking salted water. Seeming to quench the thirst only to cause the continuity for greater attachment in the future. attachment, when our attachments are not fulfilled, our wishes are not fulfilled, dissatisfaction arises, unhappiness, which is then conditioned to give rise to anger and jealousy and so forth. Like the leper who feels some pleasure at first, being ignorant, putting their leprous limb in a fire, even though it's searing the flesh, can cause incredible destruction. Oblivious of that at first, even if someone were to try to prevent them from putting their limb in the fire to feel that momentary relief from the itching, they would fight to stop that person from preventing them from their pleasure. They're so attached to it. Later, if they learn how destructive that is, and that by taking medication, one can actually eventually, slowly at first, eliminate the itch completely. Once they understand that, no way that you could put their limb, even forcibly, back into the fire. They would fight to avoid it. Like that, when we understand the defects of attachment, that this is the deeper problem than anger. Deeper in the sense it's longer lasting because it's associated with pleasure. It's what keeps us, in a sense, a variation of it, attached to cyclic existence, grasping toward it, not wanting to give up our ordinary, negative, contaminated, suffering state. How wonderful it would be to be free of attachment, not to have this itch at all, this thirst, to be free of this thirst completely. That would be much better than always being satisfied and only finding any kind of happiness in scratching that itch. What an inferior kind of pleasure I can find in cyclic existence like this. Think also the object of your attachment that your mind fantasizes as a source of pleasure, beauty, whatever. If broken up into its component parts, the beauty that we impute upon it, the sense of purity and cleanliness, that's gone. That is understood not to reside anywhere. If you open up the body that we're attached to, you can't find the pure, beautiful thing that we impute upon it. If you open up the wristwatch or the automobile, take it apart, you can't find the beauty that you sense there in its totality. You can't find the object of pleasure anywhere on any of the syllables. I love you. Something that we impute, some pleasure, as though that were a source of pleasure. deep down, there is no experiencer of this pleasure, the way that our mind is conceiving, an experiencer that's different than the actual experience of pleasure, as though an appropriator of that pleasure, the experiencer of the pleasure, as though a self existing, self-supporting, truly, however. There is merely the experience of pleasure, the mere experience of mere pleasure, contaminated happiness. So looking back at the experience of attachment to something, see if these antidotes, temporal antidotes, help to control that, to diminish, make unmanifest that attachment. And relax, and your attention back. How was that? You said you felt attachment was more prominent in your mind.
I think as soon as you've got attachment, you've necessarily pretty much got a little bit of anger. Not anger as in some sort of aggression, because attachment has got a little bit of a, like the fear, it's the attachment, fear, aggression, they tend to, I mean that's my small experience, they tend to all sort of manifest pretty much the same, you know, like, because attachment is fear, it is fearful.
When my teacher Geshe Darge used to say that all of the delusions, all the afflictions are interrelated, so they all can instigate and affect one another, like a ball of yarn that has been left out. Maybe the cat's got at it, you know, and now you try to unravel it. Or maybe what's the thing we always try to unravel? What? Christmas. There's very topical Christmas tree lights, and you know, and just long things. So indeed, because we have attachment, that can give rise to unhappy mind when our attachment is not fulfilled, which can give rise to anger, because that arises from unhappy mind. But even so, when one meditates on it, one can think of that, how, you know, I have to start somewhere. So the skillful thing to do is start with your biggest problem, whether it be anger or attachment. It doesn't mean that's your only problem or that will always be your biggest problem, but right at the moment, that's a skillful thing to do, because that's the thing that's instigating the most problem for you, right? To see, so if you think in a kind of strategy like this, using this kind of methodology, first identifying what attachment is. It's not just feeling pleasure. There's nothing wrong with feeling pleasure, right? You shouldn't think, I just felt good. Oh, you know, it must be attachment. That's not necessarily attachment. Just feeling good, is it? What do you think? Why not?
Is the exaggeration of the qualities. It's not just...
Well, is attachment the exaggeration, or is it something that arises from the exaggeration? You're getting pretty clever now, okay? You're anticipating. Before, I could fool you guys all the time. You'd always give the wrong answer. Now you get... Right. So, attachment is based on something that's pleasurable. Due to exaggerating the qualities, the mind becomes disturbed and wants to get that. That's when we say attachment, it has the quality of being stuck to, right? Attached to. I'm attached to you. I'm attached to this. I'm attached to pleasure. I'm attached to ease.
It seems to be like very gentle with your mind, because it's like this real suffering entity, you know, but still have a certain level of determination. You still have to be like determined, but like some sort of gentleness as well, you know, because it's like a
I think
crying
absolutely,
baby or
you're
something.
absolutely right. That's something you probably encountered in your practice, because if you're too tough on yourself, you can be unrealistic. You have to kind of, I think, you have to have the ability to laugh at your own mistakes in the same way, and still love yourself, not narcissistically, but in the same way that you can love others even if they make mistakes. You know, say maybe your kids or your companions, they've made mistakes. Sometimes you might be unhappy with them for some time, but if you really love them, you can accept those mistakes and still love them. Right? So you have to be able to do that with yourself also, to see your warts and carbuncles and bulges and whatever, and to feel yourself as lovable. That's, in fact, in the meditations, to develop love toward others, sometimes you have to start with yourself. You have to, if you don't have a feeling of esteem and that you are worthy of happiness, how could others be worthy of happiness? So maybe meditate on yourself for a while. Okay, let's go over some of the. So these were the ones that were based on attachment. There were only 3 that out of these that are based solely on attachment: avarice, or what do we say, miserliness. In particular, for miserliness, I think you could apply a further way of thinking, analyzing, to see the disadvantages of miserliness and the advantages of giving that can help you to overcome that particular kind of manifestation of attachment. I think sometimes when people start, hearing the advantages of turning the mani wheel or reciting sutras, they have so much merit. They can overcome their laziness and actually, spend a lot of time doing that. If you start to recognize the advantages of giving, that can help to energize you. Remember when we talked about perseverance and energy? What was the cause of perseverance? When we talked, aspiration was a cause of aspiring for something, and that comes about from some understanding, at least faith, if not wisdom, some faith. So if you have if you have some either faith that there is benefit from practicing generosity, or some understanding of the karmic results of that, and then thinking about that again and again, that can give rise to the aspiration to receive those benefits, to attain that quality, because through giving you can have unlimited resources, both for your own continued practice within cyclic existence without having all sorts of obstacles, and also you can have the resources to be able to share with others in the Bodhisattva path. So that can be something in particular, meditating on miserliness. Self-satisfaction, I think gyakpa in Tibetan, I'm not sure in this one. A precursor of pride that's kind of satisfied, attached to some superficial qualities, again, recognizing the suffering nature of cyclic existence. Whatever qualities you might have are impermanent. They're not the real nature, pleasurable nature and so forth. And excitement. What are the antidotes to excitement? Well, excitement is a mind that has, if you're concentrating on a virtuous object, it's a mental factor that allows you to lose your mindfulness of the object because it focuses out of attachment to some other object. Something that you imagine as pleasurable. Something you're attached to. So what are the antidotes to that? When we did calm abiding meditation, when we talk about the 5 faults and the 8 antidotes, one of the faults is excitement and sinking. And the supposed antidote of that is what? Do you remember? No, not equanimity. No, wait, not equanimity. Now, what did you? Not mindfulness. It's what they call alertness. But in the text it says alertness is not the actual antidote, but it's when it talks about the 5 faults and the 8 antidotes, it's that which allows you to know the fault is present. You have to have some certain kind of mental spy to notice that you have lost the object. But the actual antidote then is in what's sort of implied in the next one, which was what? Not applying the antidote. The next fault, right? In the 5 faults. Not applying or under-applying, not applying the antidote. So in the case of excitement, one of the antidotes might be, as Oma said, meditating on death and impermanence, something that causes the mind to become a little more sober. You can actually think, as we did here, this object that I'm being excited toward, I'm scattering toward, is not real. Even if I had that, I wouldn't be really happy. Even if I was thinking of it continuously, I wouldn't really be happy. It's of the nature of suffering. It's impermanent. I think for me, maybe just because of the way my mind works at present, the meditating on the fact that things are not of the nature of happiness, that they're actually of a suffering nature. They're actually dukkha, suffering nature. That is very powerful. And then also meditating on, if you can't sober the mind by meditating on death and impermanence in order to cause the mind to be less excited, what you can do is analyze the object of attachment also, thinking of it as impermanent, as suffering, as repulsive. Imagine it, opening it up with the scalpel of your mind and seeing the various components. Even a car, even your new Mercedes. Anyone have a new Mercedes? Do you have a new Mercedes, Leah? Dorji has visualized Mercedes. Oma, what do you have? You have a Lexus.
100,000-mile maintenance done on it.
Is that good? Should we?
That's good. Well, I don't know. They found some things wrong, and I had to pay for it to get it fixed.
Okay.
But you know what?
I shouldn't have brought that up.
No,
Okay.
it's okay.
Don't worry about it.
No, I had to do it because I had to use the brakes more coming over here and everything, and so that's what caused it.
Okay. So, so these are the classic meditations on to overcome attachment. If you analyze, if you talk about excitement, the particular thing to quell that at first, because you should be doing this other kind of analysis in between sessions, that it's of a suffering nature, that it's impermanent, that it's not pure the way that your mind thinks, that it's actually selfless. But the actual antidote to excitement is to help to calm down the mind, because when the mind is too tight or too excited, it tends to jump to these other objects. So that to sober the mind by thinking of death and impermanence To think, this is my one chance to practice. If I don't do it now, when am I ever going to find a time? I'm certainly not going to be able to develop tranquil abiding when I'm born in hell. If I can't do it now, I'm not going to be able to develop tranquil abiding if I'm born in the God realms like Dorje. Because there'll be so many pleasures there, my mind will even be more excited, right? Could there be even more pleasure in your life, Dorje? Not possible. I don't think so. Okay. So let's look at the next couple ones here. The afflictions that derive from bewilderment. So here, why does it say bewilderment and not ignorance? Because in a sense, we're talking about ones that derive from the three poisons, but also, see if he translates bewilderment as timuk, yeah, which is one of the three poisons, not ignorance, sort of like an unclarity of the mind, which includes also ignorance, which is that active marikpa or avidya is actually an active kind of misapprehension about things, a misdirected wisdom. So the first one is called concealment. Is that the same in the list in over here? Same word? Which number is that? Number 3, right? Concealment. So that's traditionally given third in the list. Concealment is a mental factor that wishes to hide one's own unwholesome qualities whenever another person with a benevolent intention, free from either unwholesome aspiration, bewilderment, or hatred or fear, this is talking about the other person, talks about such negative qualities. In other words, if someone's giving you advice, or in a Dharma lecture, or in general, if they're telling you shouldn't do this or that, if one hides one's unwholesome qualities, basically done out of bewilderment, out of this kind of ignorance, this is called concealment. This occurs when someone genuinely tries to help us by pointing out certain shortcomings we may have. Does anyone have a feeling about that? Did you ever have that in your life?
Case. If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it would be that way. I would try and project an image that wasn't true.
We'll see in the next one, in sort of like pretension and deceit. They're a little bit similar to concealment. Here, this is not talking, like say for instance, if you're protecting your client, conceal. In fact, that's even a legal term, is it? Is that actually like concealment? Oh, you say, I object, concealment of evidence or something like that. Can you say that in court? Is that a legal term, concealment? Sounds like it.
But it is, yeah.
Oh, excuse me. But I've watched Law and Order enough times to know that it's used sometime. It may not be. Not joking. As people say, there was something in some book article I was reading, someone said, how do you know so much about law? And he said, I've seen Law and Order enough times. Crime and Punishment or whatever it's called, Law and Order. So concealment is talking about your own faults, not your client's faults. Okay? This is talking about a mental factor that is detrimental to ourself. Concealing your client's faults might actually be beneficial and necessary as a lawyer, but this is talking about when others, out of a good intention, point out something, and you say you don't want to hear it. Usually, what is it? We don't like to hear criticism, isn't it? We call it criticism. We're very sensitive. We don't like to hear anything about our faults. And that can instigate this kind of mind that conceals it, sort of ignores it, and doesn't reveal it to others. Concealment. This is out of bewilderment. Then, dullness. Dullness is what on our other list? Is it also called dullness? I think it's what she calls lethargy, isn't it? So this gives you an idea of the range of terminology that can be used for something. Lethargy or dullness. Dullness or lethargy is a mental factor that, having caused the mind to lapse into darkness and thereby become insensitive, does not comprehend its object clearly as it is. It has the function of making the mind and body heavy and inflexible and increasing sleepiness and sinking. So this is not itself the main fault in tranquil abiding, which is, what is it called? Jingwa in Tibetan, which is sinking, mental sinking. That's sinking itself is what Rinpoche talked about when either you lose the clarity of the object, it sort of becomes dull, doesn't become as clear, or you lose the, what do you say, the grasp of that. You lose the intensity of the clarity. So that's sinking, which is one of the main faults. Here, this is something a little bit grosser. This can induce sinking, as it says. What does it say? It has the function of making the mind and body heavy and inflexible and of increasing sleepiness and sinking. So sleepiness is different than sinking also. This is mukba, this one, what is it called over there? What did I just say? Lethargy. It's called lethargy. It's kind of like the mind becoming kind of dull. Mukba can mean kind of like dark or cloudy. So dullness should not be confused with sinking. The latter, sinking, only occurs in the more advanced states of mental quiescence meditation and is not necessarily an affliction. How can that be? Sinking is not necessarily affliction? Why is that? Wouldn't you think that sinking, mental sinking, is an affliction? Because what's an affliction? An affliction is something that necessarily creates negative karma? Do afflictions necessarily create negative karma? So it follows that self-grasping in the retinue of a virtuous mind is creating negative karma because it's an affliction. So not all the afflictions, such as, for instance, that kind of ignorance, which is grasping the true existence, and the view of the transitory collection, they're not necessarily by nature non-virtuous. Right? They actually are present. We talked about this many times, right? They're actually present in contaminated virtue also. But in general, the general characteristic of a klesha, of a disturbing state of mind and affliction or delusion, is that it disturbs the mind. It's based on ignorance, so it's not a knowing, correctly knowing mind. If it's a wisdom at all, it's a distorted wisdom, or if it's not a wisdom, if it has some other function, it is unclear and it is disturbed. That's kind of the function. So sinking may not, here it says, dullness, which is a unwholesome mental factor. These are all of these 20 secondary minds are by nature negative, non-virtuous. This should not be confused with sinking, which only occurs in more advanced states of mental quiescence and is not necessarily an affliction. So it's not necessarily a klesha, sinking. When the body and mind are light and joyful, sinking manifests as a decrease in one's mental energy, somewhat akin to air escaping through a tiny hole in a balloon. Okay, so as in sinking, there's two kinds of dullness, gross and subtle. Then faithlessness. I ask you, what's this the opposite of? See how awake you are now. Has dullness? Faith. It's opposite of faith, right? This is non-faith. You could also translate it as non-faith. In fact, I think Sikhi translated here as non-faith. So faithlessness is a mental factor that, since it causes one to have no belief in or respect for that which is worthy of confidence, such as laws, cause and effect, and so forth, is the complete opposite of faith. It has the function of acting as the basis for laziness, Why is that? Remember when we talked about the first fault of shine, of tranquil abiding, was it first fault? Yeah, laziness. And one of the antidotes to that, the causes of laziness, or the antidotes to laziness were what? Faith, giving rise to aspiration, giving rise to effort, giving rise to pliancy, which is actual antidote to laziness. So here, faithlessness is said to have the function of serving as the basis for laziness, because without faith, you're not going to develop aspiration to overcome it, and so forth, and go through those stages. And it also has the function of causing the power of faith to decrease, not surprisingly. In addition, it makes one disbelieve, disrespect, and have no desire for that which is positive. So two kinds of faithlessness: that which simply does not see the need for or the fruits of virtue, and that which regards virtue either mistakenly or as non-existent. So one of them is kind of like the passive kind of ignorance, not knowing something. The other one is actively mistaking something in the wrong way, conceiving of it at the wrong way. So if we have, can you identify that in yourself or others, faithlessness? Lack of faith? Yeah. So as this is connected with bewilderment, all of these, the last three, what did we start out with here? Faithlessness, dullness, and concealment so far. These are all due to a kind of darkness of mind, either actively misconceiving something, the active kind of faithlessness, or the passively not knowing something due to the ignorance of unknowing. Then laziness. Laziness in Tibetan, lelo, kind of almost sounds like laziness, doesn't it? Lelo Chempo. Big laziness. So laziness doesn't mean, like someone's just sitting around. It doesn't refer to the physical manifestation. It refers to a mental state, right? Laziness, which is a mental factor that, having firmly grasped an object offering temporary happiness, either does not want to do anything wholesome, or, although wanting to, is faint-hearted. Oh, that's a good definition. Faint-hearted. So this kind of includes several of the different kinds of laziness. We talked about laziness before when we talked about enthusiastic perseverance. We talked about laziness, and there were different kinds of enthusiastic perseverance to counter different kinds of laziness. So there's a laziness of being attached to samsaric pleasure. I think for a lot of us, that might be one of the major obstacles to practicing the Dharma. Laziness that's attached to samsaric pleasure. How could that be laziness? In fact, that could even be called, in some cases, it could be even called enthusiastic perseverance, being motivated to make $1 million, Yes. I thought you were playing a video game there, and then you were just commenting on your own.
Yeah, Peter asked me a question.
Oh, I see. Computing. The laziness of being discouraged, thinking, if I have to put up with this to practice Dharma, to help, to practice the Bodhisattva path, I can't do it. This, I'm just not capable. This is kind of like what's meant by faint-hearted. So there are different kinds like that. So these laziness also can arise basically from bewilderment, because it says it's a mental factor that, having firmly grasped an object offering temporary happiness, does not want to do anything wholesome, or although wanting to is faint-hearted. I think that the laziness which is attached to samsaric happiness might be also derived from attachment, not surprisingly enough. This negative mental factor is what is overcome by enthusiasm. Okay? Another one which is connected with this kind of ignorance, bewilderment, is forgetfulness. Forgetfulness, same as in Ziggy's number 18, forgetfulness is that the exact opposite of mindfulness. So it's the mental factor that once, even if you were to think of something, some virtuous object, that you would lose it very, very quickly. Say, for instance, if someone says, I'm very forgetful, does that mean if they're getting Alzheimer's or old age dementia, does that mean that they're creating negative karma? Because they have forgetfulness? These are all non-virtuous mental factors. Right? Well, here's his forgetfulness is a unwholesome mental factor. So does that mean if you forget things, oh, where are my keys? Oh, I forgot. Does that mean that you create negative karma? Don's getting very precise now, and he's checking now. Okay, what do you think, Don? It can't be, right? It can't be just forgetting your keys is non-virtuous. So what is the forgetfulness, which is this non-virtuous mental factor, is a mental factor that having caused the apprehension of a wholesome referent to be lost, induces recollection of and distraction toward a disturbing referent, object of observation. So it refers to a particular kind of state of mind, that you're observing something that's wholesome, but then lose that object. And finally, inattentiveness. Inattentiveness is the opposite of attentiveness, right? Which was, what does she call here? Inattentiveness. In Siggy's list. She puts the list here at the beginning. Non-conscientiousness, is that right? So here's the list. It says concealment, envy, self-centeredness, shamelessness, inconsideration, dullness, excitement, faithlessness, laziness, unconscientiousness, inattentiveness, and distraction. So it's non-wisdom in Ziggy's text, 19. Non-wisdom. Actually, it's Sheishin Mayimpa. She's taken it as non-wisdom. I don't think that's the correct translation. It is a kind of non-wisdom, but it's Sheishin means, as we usually call it, attentiveness or introspection, right? It's that state of mind that is watching, like the mental spy. So this is the opposite of that. This is a mental factor that being an afflicted state of intelligence which has made no or only a rough analysis, it is not fully aware of the conduct of one's body, speech, and mind. And then finally, there are two that are related with both attachment and bewilderment, pretension and dishonesty. So this is a little bit different than the concealment you were talking about before. For instance, in one's own, we talked about these before, gyu and yo. I think it was called here, what? Deceit and dissimulation. Okay? So pretension or deceit is to pretend to have qualities that you don't, whereas dishonesty is to confuse others, to keep one's faults unknown from them. It's a little bit different than concealment. This has arisen from both attachment and bewilderment because you're attached to respect and material gain, and you don't want others to know that you have faults. And then the last section is those that are derived from all three mental poisons: shamelessness and inconsideration for others, unconscientiousness. Those are the opposites of the mental factors that we talked in detail about before. And finally, distraction, which is, this 20th one is not in general excitement. This is a general losing of an object due to any of the three mental factors, three poisonous minds. So this kind of finishes our practice day. Is that right? Oh, it's tea time. I'm sorry. Okay, we've got plenty of time. I thought it was. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's take time for tea. There you go. In terms of antidotes to those things that are connected with anger, in general, we could say the antidotes to anger, some of the antidotes that we mentioned before, temporal antidotes, such as Atisha mentioned, right? Understanding karma, the arrow and the target. Impermanence, which is a kind of wisdom. Actually, if you extended that one, you could also talk about the wisdom of emptiness. The guru, understanding this situation is something you need. It's teaching you something rather than thinking, I don't need this. And compassion, which helps overcome the cruel, condescending mind that thinks other people deserve this suffering. Doesn't matter if I harm them. So, in a sense, those could cover a lot of the antidotes to anger, particularly if you included in the wisdom of impermanence the other sort of facet of that, the wisdom of emptiness. Of course, it's not a subset of wisdom of impermanence, but it's another kind of wisdom, a deeper kind of wisdom. That is the ultimate antidote to, anger, because anger arises from a sense of self and a truly existent harm or truly existent suffering, a truly existent unhappiness. So meditating on that. Also, in purifying negative karma, one of the greatest, what the four opponent forces are, don't you? Or is it 5 opponent forces? How many opponent forces are there? 4. What are they, Frank?
Say it louder.
So, Thea gets 5 points taken off for answering Frank's question, and Frank gets 5 points taken off for not hearing. So, what?
Purification is one of them.
Purification. Actually, they're all purifications. I don't know if purification, what you mean by purification. How about start with regret? Once you regret, you have to make a decision not to do it again. So that's also the resolution, or so you could, if you want to just keep them all as R's. Regret, resolution, mean not to do again. What else?
Repent.
That's regret. Repent, regret. What is it?
Reliance.
Reliance on in the Glupa tradition, we say relying on sentient beings to purify negative karma created with respect to sentient beings. So that means developing compassion, especially bodhicitta, and relying on the triple gem to overcome negativities with respect to them. And that would include taking refuge in the triple gem. And then you could say remedy. We could get 4 R's that way, right? Regret, resolve, reliance, which includes, and remedy. Remedy means the power of the remedies. So in the case of the 35 Confession Buddha Sutra, it would mean reciting the names, the virtuous action that you do, or making prostrations, or different kinds of remedies you can do, reciting the sutras, saying mantras for the particular purpose of compensating for the negative action you've done. Or in particular, you can try to link, if you've been miserly, to actually go out and give to the poor, or to teach those that are in need of teaching. If you feel that you have abandoned others, you have ignored others, maybe because you notice yourself being ignored or unloved, then to love others, to work at the hospice, to help others, to give guidance to them, that can help to purify that. Or if you've killed, or if you notice, or if you don't know that you've killed, but you notice the effect of having killed in past lives, so your own life is in danger, your life span is in danger, you have cancer, leukemia, whatever, to liberate living beings that are imprisoned, or animals that are going to be eaten or used as bait and so forth, to free them. That can help those are examples of remedies or creating virtuous karma to help compensate for the negative actions. So in the context, when we talk about purification, also one of the strongest kinds of purification is meditation on emptiness. In particular, if you think, if you can recall some negative action that you've done and that you might feel regret about, regret, if it's still holding that action and the object and so forth to be truly existent, truly existent George, truly got angry at truly existent Buddha or whatever, If you're holding that kind of mind, that even that kind of regret, that won't be as powerful as meditating on the emptiness of that. So meditate on the emptiness of what you conceived of as the agent yourself. Let's say if you're regretting your own negative actions. There was never a truly existent self, even though at the moment of creating the action, it was created out of the conception of a truly existent self. I've got to get out of this problem. I've got to get rid of this fly. I've got to say these words. I've got to take that money. I've got to do whatever, negative action you've done. There was never a truly existent person the way that your mind was conceiving. So to meditate on that, even at the time the action was done, there was no truly existent person. And the action that was now regretted, that you think of and grasp to as truly existent, is also not truly existent. To meditate on the emptiness of the action. Like when we meditate on the emptiness of the three spheres. Here we're starting with the agent, the action, and let's say the recipient of the action. In the cases there is a recipient, say for instance in stealing or harming, saying harsh words, lying to someone, the person that you might have offended or hurt or stolen from or whatever, abused, does not truly exist the way that your mind conceives. You said those harsh words to. So meditating on emptiness like that, and also meditating on bodhicitta, which is one of the four opponent powers that falls in reliance. Also meditating on bodhicitta within the power of a remedy, because it's a great accumulation of merit. All of these things can help to purify the negative karma very powerfully. So let's just finish up again. I'll just say a little bit more about these two that are derived from both attachment and bewilderment. That is, pretension and dishonesty. I like that translation a little bit better than deceit and dissimulation, even though that's an alliteration. Excuse me. Even that's so. That's not an alliteration. What's that called? Deceit and dissimulation is also alliteration. That's not alliteration. What is that? When you have the iteration at the end. You would know, John, because you're speaker, author. Who's your author? Poet? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Someone watching the DVD will know. They say, wow, I wish the guys are so stupid they don't know this. Okay. So, pretension and dishonesty. So what's the difference between pretension, let's say dishonesty and concealment? First of all, concealment was connected with bewilderment alone. Okay? Whereas dishonesty is connected with all three root delusions. So it's also based on an attachment to respect and material gain, whereas concealment is kind of just ignorant and doesn't want others to know one's faults. So it's a little bit different. When we talk about the what do they call it? The Eightfold Noble Path. There's something called right livelihood. Do you know what right livelihood is? Usually we talk about right livelihood as involving obtaining the resources for life without, amongst other things, pretension or deceit. Or no, what do we call it here? Pretension and dishonesty. So, for instance, it might be that you obtain your livelihood by pretending to be something you're not. Putting on airs, being an expert or something like that. Also through dissimulation or through dishonesty, in the sense that, the story of Geshe Bungengel. We've probably heard that story many times. There are many anecdotes about him. When he was meditating in a cave and he heard that his patrons were coming. Usually his cave was very messy. He didn't have his altar set up or not. But thinking that they would be impressed by seeing the altar, and maybe they'd make more offerings. And also they'd be disappointed if he didn't have an altar. So he cleaned up the room and set up all the offering bowls with water and got everything ready. And then he realized that this was wrong livelihood. He was essentially involving himself in these two, pretension and dishonesty. How was he doing that? And which of them was functioning? Or were both of them functioning? In which way? What do you think, Venerable?
It was always like that. That it was always nice and clean and tidy. And then obviously that's a sense of dishonesty as well, because it wasn't always like that.
Well, also hiding the fact, like cleaning up the room, hiding, putting all the dirty socks under the bed and things. So what, what he did? You know the story, Diana, what he did?
Then he ended up, when he realized he was doing that, then he threw dirt on something.
Yeah, he took ashes from the fireplace and threw them all over the altar, and then some lama in the area, I think, who had clairvoyance, smiled and said, "Oh, Bungengel has created a peerless offering just now," something like that, because he was practicing Dharma like that. So these two can be causes which arise from attachment and bewilderment, can be causes of wrong livelihood. So both pretension and dishonesty are similar in that they wish to convey a false image of oneself to others. Superficially, they seem to cheat and deceive others, but in reality, they only cheat and deceive oneself. So here, dishonesty has two aspects, one that arises out of attachment and one that arises out of bewilderment. So, in a sense, the one that arises out of attachment is just derived from attachment. So you could put dishonesty in two places, under attachment and under bewilderment. Same thing with pretension. And then, as we said, three that are derived from all three mental poisons: shamelessness and inconsideration for others. So, shameless, that's a shameless action. So remember when we talked about shame and consideration for others, how did we translate here? Shame and embarrassment. So here it calls non-shame and non-embarrassment. So shame is the avoidance of a negative action, taking oneself mainly as the reason why you're doing that. Either the karmic consequences will be bad for oneself or whatever. And embarrassment or consideration for others is avoiding non-virtue, taking into consideration others, one's gurus or other Dharma practitioners or other living beings might, by this action, knowing that I'm a Buddhist, other people will lose faith in Buddhism, so I better not do that. So that kind of positive state of mind, lacking either of those, actively acting opposite to that, is shamelessness and inconsideration. So what are this? Shamelessness is a distinct mental factor that does not avoid the unwholesome, either for reasons of personal consciousness or for the sake of Dharma. To be shameless. So it doesn't avoid it. That means it does it, it engages in it, right? Without taking these things into consideration. So seems like shamelessness would be present as an adjunct, as a mental factor in almost all non-virtuous mental actions. Is that possible? Can you have shamelessness and anger at the same time? Can't you only have one one delusion at the same time? No, there's no contradiction in having several of the afflictions present at the same time. You might think, for instance, you can't have a virtuous state of mind and a non-virtuous state of mind present simultaneously because they're contradictory. But shamelessness is not contradictory to anger. It can be present. The very fact that you're not avoiding getting angry, not avoiding being attached, can be an example of shamelessness. It acts as a supportive condition for all the root and proximate, secondary afflictions, and as a basis for spoiling the guarding of one's vows. So that destroys that ability to guard the vows. If you are shameless, if you don't have that sense of avoiding things like that. Then inconsideration for others is a mental factor that, without taking others or spiritual traditions into account, so it can mean either your gurus or the Mahayana or Buddhism or whatever in general, it wishes to behave in a manner that does not avoid negative behavior. Wishes to behave in a manner that does not avoid negative behavior. So, thinking, what do they say? Just let go. Do what you want. What else do people say? Let it all hang out. Yeah? Letting it all hang out. Do you still say that? No. I'll say, okay, a bit dated here. What would you say now in Santa Cruz? We need Chris here for the surfing. John, what would you say?
I hear let go.
Let go. Let go. Let go can be good, but here, letting go completely without a sense of avoiding negative action. So, in a sense, this one part of it can arise from bewilderment, from not knowing that the actions you're doing, that you are engaging in, are negative. For instance, if the psychologist tells you to dredge up these memories of having been abused by Father O'Flannery or whatever in Catholic school, or that your uncle or auntie or someone had, abused you when you were a child. And then oftentimes what they do is they advise, I've heard, if you're a psychologist, maybe you can correct me if this is wrong, they advise people sometimes to feel the anger, to let that anger out. Not just to identify, which would be okay from a Buddhist perspective, that there was something that one has been repressing, but actually it's good to be angry. That would be sort of a sense of, from a Buddhist perspective, a sense of shamelessness, not avoiding the negative action of anger. Because anger itself is something that creates a great deal of negative karma, and in so doing destroys one's roots of virtue. So along with shamelessness and inconsideration for others, unconscientiousness. So conscientiousness is somewhat akin to shame and consideration for others. Remember the virtuous mental factors? But here, what is the difference? Unconscientiousness is a mental factor that when one is affected by laziness, so you're being unconscientious, wishes to freely act in an unrestrained manner without cultivating virtue or guarding the mind against contaminated phenomena. That would be what? Hanging out? Unconscientiousness. So if you, not guarding the mind, it's a quality ascribed, or let's say a fault ascribed to any of the three mental poisons when they are accompanied by laziness. So if the three poisonous minds are accompanied by laziness, unconscientiousness will also be present, because the three poisonous minds predispose one to create negative karma, and laziness, as it says, is one is affected by laziness, wishes to freely act in an unrestrained manner. So even if you know these things are negative, and the negative mind is there, if you have a certain amount of conscientiousness, you don't have to follow that negative mind completely. You could be aware of it. and try to create an antidote to it. And as I said before, distraction or wandering, I think you could say namyeng, nampa yengwa in Tibetan. Distraction is a general kind of wandering of the mind. Here it says, is a mental factor that unable to direct the mind toward a wholesome object. So if you're talking about wandering or distraction as a negative, as this unwholesome mental factor, it's when you are focusing on a wholesome object, love or guru or, meditating on death and impermanence and so forth, or emptiness, and you're unable to keep that in mind because of wandering onto something else, either because of hatred or bewilderment or attachment, that in general is called distraction. So one of the texts mentions also that there's a difference between distraction in general and what we called excitement. Or did that come under the section of excitement? Do we just have excitement here? Under attachment, right? Or what is it? Excitement is a mental factor. Blah, blah. This mental factor is often with us, but its presence only becomes truly felt when we start to concentrate the mind in meditation. This is talking about excitement. Not all forms of mental distraction are caused by excitement, and only those that are brought about by our attachment to or desire for agreeable contaminated object. That's called excitement. So the distraction in general, this kind of distraction might have you might say as a subset of it would be excitement, that which is a distraction due to attachment. Now, of the different kinds of distraction, so here it says inherent distraction, external distraction, internal distraction. So what would you think? Internal distraction as opposed to external distraction? What would be the difference? What would you think without checking the actual meaning breach? External distraction.
Internal distraction would be thoughts of the past, future, whatever, and external distraction, that's outside noise.
That sounds like what it means to me, but that's not what it. So it's good to read what it says. Is that's not what it means. That's what it thought. That's what I would have thought. Also, external distraction means distracted to something external, and internal means just like the thoughts. Actually, your thoughts about external objects are also called external distraction. But if you are distracted to, say, the pleasure of the bliss of meditation, or some internal quality like that, that's called internal distraction. Let's just check. Of these two, external distraction, all wholesome states of mind within the desire realm, such as learning, reflection, and so forth, have this quality. That is, wholesome states of mind within the desire realm. That means you haven't attained calm abiding yet, so your mind is of the desire realm. There's always going to be distraction, even in a wholesome mind, because it's not single-pointed yet. You haven't attained tranquil abiding. And it will always have this quality. It arises whenever the mind is unable to remain directed toward a wholesome referent for a sustained period of time. Within the realm of desire, unwholesome states of mind are constantly subject, wholesome states of mind, are constantly subject to being dispersed from one object to another. Okay? Internal distraction is the excitement and sinking, so even sinking here can mean distraction apparently, that occur during concentrated equipoise, as well as the craving for the taste of absorption. The taste of absorption. So you can have a craving, a clinging attachment to the bliss that arises from meditation, which is not yet unattached. So that can be this kind of inner distraction. So we were going to, mainly we're going to go over these today. We'll do one more meditation, but I just wanted to mention, just to reiterate about the changeable mental factors. There are 4. Do you remember what the 4 are? 4 changeable? Karen, do you remember? You don't remember all. So, Dorsey? Regret, sleep, investigation, and analysis. Now you might wonder, because like a lot of them, remember here when we talked about, well, let's say, if we talk about wisdom, what kind of mental factor is wisdom? Cherub. Is it an omnipresent mental factor, a virtuous mental factor? How many people vote for omnipresent? Okay. How many people vote for virtuous? How many people vote for object ascertaining? How many people vote for negative, affliction? Okay, so we're being democratic about the Dharma. We're taking a vote. It's not the way as Lama Yeshe used to say, Dharma is not a democracy. But anyway, we don't vote and have instant callbacks or rebates or whatever. Wisdom is an object ascertaining mental factor, which is by nature what? Virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral? Neutral, unpredicted, right? So it can become virtuous or non-virtuous by the presence of another affliction in the mind, which is virtuous or non-virtuous, right? It, by its own nature, doesn't have that quality. What if I say this? What about the wisdom that is analyzing how to make a plutonium bomb in order to blow up, some peaceful people? Wouldn't that be negative by nature? Georgie says yes. What do you think? So the texts are wrong. So wisdom actually can be by nature negative. So you'd have to say no. The books probably are not wrong. I'm just not thinking. That's not there.
I was thinking motivation. I mean, if you were to build this atom bomb and wanting to blow someone up, it would depend on your motivation.
Yeah, because the motivation or even the temporal state of mind. Just say, for instance, you were one of the technicians that were purchased from, what was it, Iran or one of these countries that had all of these technicians, and then where was it? Libya, and you hired them, and they're just motivated out of making money, just as any other job, and they're doing this. They don't know what you're going to do with it. That wouldn't necessarily be non-virtuous. They don't have a non-virtuous motivation, right? But if we talk about what's the difference between that kind of mind, which could be virtuous or non-virtuous, and, for instance, regret, that can be virtuous or non-virtuous? Because regret is a variable or changeable mental factor. So I'm trying to see the difference. Wisdom can be virtuous or non-virtuous, but it's classified as a object ascertaining mental factor. Whereas now we hit regret, and that's called a changeable mental factor.
Is it based on the face of what you're regretting as opposed to your intention?
Well, let me ask you this. Is regret by nature either virtuous or non-virtuous? That is to say, a virtuous, a regret becomes non-virtuous by its nature. It is non-virtuous by its nature when you regret doing some virtuous action. Yeah. Whereas wisdom is not virtuous or non-virtuous by its own nature.
Didn't beat someone up at school because he really needed it or something.
That's interesting for you to say. You must have gone to a private school in Scotland. You could regret that you didn't beat someone up in school. I'm surprised that you gave that example. You could regret. Yeah. Right, right. And you can regret doing something virtuous and so forth. But I'm just wondering, these, I think it's worth analyzing whether all of these states are, by their nature, virtuous or not virtuous. Regret may be, when there's regret about a virtuous action, you regret having given charity. I could have saved that money and had been able to make this phone call now, and why did I give that money away? Regretting that is itself, that regret itself becomes non-virtuous, so that mind can change. Regretting something that you did that's non-virtuous, like one of the opponent forces, that can become virtuous by nature. I'm not sure about the other ones. What about investigation and analysis? Are they more akin to wisdom? They can be virtuous or non-virtuous, but that depends on what you're investigating, right? So anyway, those four, investigation and analysis, are often mentioned when we talk about the qualities of the form realm, the various concentrations, because as you progress among a subtler and subtler mind, at first you lose the ability for fine analysis, and all you can do is kind of a gross investigation. Investigation is a coarser kind of checking. Then later you even lose the ability, as the mind becomes very subtle, to do investigation. So you can find these terms, investigation and analysis, when we investigate, when we talk about the various concentrations, their various qualities that are attained or lost there. So let's just think now for a second, the main antidote to ignorance, to, let's say, bewilderment, not just understanding the law of cause and effect, that can overcome the bewilderment which is unknowing of certain things. But the main antidote to ignorance and bewilderment is the wisdom that sees reality as it is, understands the ultimate nature of phenomena, that they are empty of true existence. So maybe it's fitting that we finish up with a meditation on that. That's the antidote to all of our kinds of ignorance, and it becomes the ultimate antidote to our anger, our attachment, our jealousy, our pride, doubt, all of the mental afflictions, our depression, everything. We've talked in other classes, in the Lan Rim mainly talks about meditating on the emptiness of the person, first of all, seeking the object of negation. You could do the same thing also from the beginning with other external phenomena. For instance, one of the classic examples is in the sutras is a cart or chariot, analyzing, to think, what is my akura or allura? What is it? Acura. Oh, it is a Lexus. I thought Oma said it wasn't a Lexus. Toyota. Oh, it's a Toyota. Okay. Acura?
I was looking at cars on the internet last night. You've got cars in the mind today.
I got cars in mind. So, when we're thinking of cart or chariot, I was just trying to think of a modern example, and Oma's car was prominent in the mind, so I was using that. So if you think, what is my car? It seems to be something that could be an object of attachment, especially if it's concretized as something truly existent. It can be an object of frustration and anger also, isn't it? When it conks out on Route 17 or whatever, runs out of gas or whatever. So what is the car that we're conceiving of? We're referring to a conventionally existent car. Let's say conventionally existent Toyota my car is a name that we impute to that collection of parts. It can't be found in the collection, separate from the collection. It's not the configuration of the parts. It doesn't possess, the Toyota doesn't possess the parts. It is not possessed by the parts. If one analyzes in these various ways, said to be a sevenfold fold analysis, perhaps Rinpoche Rinpoche will mention when we talk about the emptiness of phenomena. You can use a similar kind of analysis that we do for the selflessness of persons for phenomena, but there are some other reasonings that are used in general. So let's sit comfortably. Try to collect our thoughts again to calm our mind. Watch your breathing. Then bring your attention to your mental consciousness. Just aware with your mental consciousness of the substratum of the mind, its clear light nature, irregardless of the content that may appear and you might wander or be distracted to. Now, having had some, at least, introduction to the selflessness of the person, try to recall that now. The self appears to my mind, to my mental consciousness, when I observe or refer to the conventionally existent self. There's the appearance of a truly existent self to my mind, mental consciousness. And there is a grasping to that, an assent, an agreement with that. Grasping that that's true. The same thing holds for all other phenomena. All other phenomena that, like the self, merely exist as imputations, whether it be mountain, road, fence, house, institution, also money, very good example, money just imputed to a piece of paper, value. All other phenomena, including the self, all phenomena, have an existence which is only nominal by convention, having a certain consistency with the law of cause and effect. But going beyond that, assenting to an appearance which occurs due to familiarization from beginningless time, as soon as we impute a phenomena, we're given it a name or concept, it appears to us as existing from its own side. From its own side existing, or truly existing, would mean the sense that it can be found there somewhere, residing outside, within, around, somehow attached to the basis of designation, as though we could find it if we searched. Findability within the basis of designation, not just a mere findability that John is in the Gompa and you can find him there, but looking within the basis of designation of John, the five aggregates, the sense that you can find a soul or Johnness there, or that you can actually find Land of Medicine Buddha within its parts. Where's Land of Medicine Buddha? What is Land of Medicine Buddha? Is it the board of directors? Is it the houses, the roads, the redwoods? if we search within the basis of designation of Land of Medicine Buddha, for instance, say the actual infrastructure, the houses and roads and so forth, the governing authorities, whatever they be, the board of directors and the director and so forth, all of them could, in a sense, be considered to be bases of designation of Land of Medicine Buddha. You can't find Land of Medicine Buddha anywhere within that. It's just a concept that we attribute to that collection. Just as the self is just a concept we attribute to, designate, impute to the collection of 5 aggregates. Any sense of the self as abiding other than that, some kind of solid feeling in your body, the self, or some kind of solid, concrete, findable feeling of I, the recipient, the controller within the mind. These are examples of a truly existent I. Like the self, all phenomena are empty of true existence. The only conventional existence that is valid is that which is ascribed by a conventional naming, designating mind to a basis of designation, by a consciousness. We say phenomena conventionally exist as dependent arisings. They have no inherent true existence from their own side. No existence that's findable within their basis of designation. Why? Because they're dependent arisings. If you have a sense that the self is a dependent arising, that the self arises in dependence on the basis of designation, the 5 aggregates, a name, and a consciousness designating that name, simply apply that now to all phenomena. Anything that we perceive, that we can think of, any phenomena can be said to exist to the conventional mind merely as an imputation. There's nothing that can be found from its own side. Why? Because it's a dependent arising. It's empty of any kind of inherent or true existence because it arises in dependence on consciousness, basis of designation, and concept or name given by that consciousness. So if you can, in a sense, imagine, take as your referent object all phenomena. You can think of the general category of phenomena, anything that exists. Pleasure, pain, objects of sight, sound, smell, objects of the mind. Their only conventional existence is one that's ascribed, designated by the mind, conceptually or verbally. There's nothing existing from their own side, the way that it appears to our mind. Perceiving just that non-existence of what was previously apprehended to exist, some truly existent phenomena, findable phenomena, that non-appearance dawning upon the mind is an apprehension of the space-like emptiness. all of our past actions, the sense of ourself, our ego, when we created negative actions out of attachment and anger and ignorance. There has never been, since beginningless time, a truly existent self. So there was no one truly who did those actions. There were no truly existent actions done. Those actions existed, are existing, merely as imputations conventionally ascribed to successive moments of something. The recipients of those actions, if there were recipients or objects of those actions, also did not truly exist, did not exist in the past. There was no truly existent person we harmed, or that we desired, that we lied to, that we stole from. There's no truly existent I who did these actions. Not in the past nor now. So dedicate the merits that we've created this term studying, also the merits we've created other times in the past that still reside on our continuum. You can even dedicate the merit that we will create in the future. Within the emptiness of the three spheres, due to this karma, due to this merit, may I quickly become enlightened for the sake of sentient beings, passing through all the stages necessary, whatever time it takes. Due to this karma, may those beings showing flawless paths to enlightenment have long lives, their dharma wishes be fulfilled spontaneously, effortlessly. Due to this merit, may the dharma spread where it has never spread before, the minds and places, and where it has spread but degenerated, may it be revived due to this karma, due to this merit. Within the state of some recollection of emptiness, dedicating like this, especially due to this merits, may the two bodhicittas that have not yet arisen in my own and others' continua arise due to this merit. And as a result of this merit, may whatever small semblance of bodhicitta, whether it be thinking about bodhicitta, having some small insight or aspiration toward it, whatever has arisen, may it not decline, but continue to grow ever bigger.